So 3 months ago, I put out a video talking about my thoughts and first impressions of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and the first 20 hours or so I had with it. It's a good thing I put out that video because after that, a bunch of other great games came out that I wanted to discuss as well. Stellar Blade, Hellblade 2, and Dragon's Dogma 2 all came out and were worth discussing. It also gave me time to really enjoy and sink my teeth into Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. This was good too because I ended up putting almost 120 hours into Final Fantasy VII Rebirth by the time I had completed about everything I wanted to do in my first playthrough. So there's a lot to discuss, and I wanted to put out one final video talking about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and specifically go over story and spoiler moments. I'm going to be talking about the game's ending, so if you haven't finished the game yet, save this video for later and come back and watch it after you've beaten the game. If you want to hear my thoughts on the gameplay, combat, and exploration, feel free to check out my first video. But now that I've completed the game's story, I wanted to go back and talk about it because, as I've said in the past, Final Fantasy VII Remake is my second favorite game of all time, and I was highly looking forward to this one. And now that I've wrote credits, let's talk entirely about the game's story, and even that ending. By now, you've probably seen some other video series by other content creators. I've tried to stay away from that stuff and from what other people have said, and I've tried to stay away from spoilers while I was playing the game. So this is entirely all my own thoughts. I didn't want to just regurgitate what other people had said. In fact, I really don't know too much about the theories other fans have come up with, but my initial gut reaction after playing through the game's story was that of, well, pure joy. There are so many moments in this game's story that made my jaw drop and that imbued me with so much happiness that it's hard to know where to even begin. But this game felt to me like a beautiful celebration of all things Final Fantasy VII, and I'm very happy with how the story was handled, even past the ending. There are still some moments that I thought, this isn't so great. But nonetheless, I think there's a lot here to chew on and talk about. Let's get right into it and chat about that ending. I've seen a lot of people online discussing that ending, and I've seen some people criticizing it. I know IGN put out an article saying how the ending wasn't great, but in all honesty, I'm all for it. What made it work for me was the lead up to it. The scenes where Aerith and Cloud are hanging out, going through the Sector 5 slums, and how no matter what they decided, there was still going to be the same outcome. That set up for the finale. It was showing how Cloud and Aerith were, in a way, destined for the same fate, no matter what. And that was a question going all the way back to Part 1 in Remake, which was that the fates of these characters were left wide open. There was still a possibility that Aerith could still live. And for a second, it looked like Aerith actually did live, and that Cloud had saved her up in the Forgotten Capital. And then all throughout that final sequence, it still left me hanging, and I was constantly wondering all throughout that final battle, wait, did Aerith die or not? And the answer, I think, couldn't be more brilliant. So is Aerith alive or not? Well, yes and no. I think the developers make it very clear that Aerith is dead, at least for the main party. Tifa is mourning her, the rest of the party can't see her hanging around the tiny Bronco, but Cloud can. He's still interacting and speaking with her. As was shown earlier between Cloud and Sephiroth, there are different worlds out there. I've seen other people online calling it like a multiverse type thing. I'm not sure whether that's an accurate description, but there are definitely multiple different timelines at play, as is seen with Zack. In this same sequence, we also see Zack, who is at a literal crossroads. Does he go and pay a visit to Hojo, or does he go to save Biggs? In the cutscene, we see him go to Shinra headquarters to see Hojo. And it's also there where Zack comes up against the Shinra guards and he meets the same fate, quote unquote. Then a little later on, we see Zack meet with Biggs, and it's a scenario of what if Zack went to meet him instead. And the developers make a big point to emphasize the different versions of Stamp on the bag. Stamp is Shinra's literal puppy mascot, and here it's a different version of Stamp showing it's a different timeline. And in this quote-unquote different timeline, Zack went to save Biggs instead of visiting Hojo. Yet here again, Zack meets the same end, supposedly. This ending was all about trying to defy fate, much like how Remake was. And in the end, Cloud and Aerith did defy it. I think that Aerith is most likely still alive in a different timeline, and that Aerith and Cloud could still communicate through the different worlds. I saw some other theories online mentioning how perhaps Aerith is a figment of Cloud's imagination, and that the pierced clouds in the sky are all a metaphor for Cloud's shattered psyche. I don't think so. The thing is, Sephiroth is real. Zack is real. The whispers are all real. Zack and many others in the world mention that they can see the shattered colors above all throughout the game. So it's not just Cloud imagining it all. I think Aerith and Zack are still very much alive. But in this timeline that we are in, this remake timeline, Aerith is very much so dead. Tifa can't interact with her, Barrett can't, the whole party can't. But she is nonetheless working behind the scenes, helping out Cloud and still trying to stop Sephiroth. I think this is absolutely brilliant because what this does is it means that the Final Fantasy developers can still stay faithful to the original game, while also still trying to carve out something new and do something different, not only from a creative standpoint, but from a fan standpoint. I'm actually all for the developers changing the story around. I was actually hoping they'd do something drastic, like have Aerith completely live, or maybe even possibly kill Tifa. They were even hinting at that possibility in Remake. But by doing this, it satisfies both sides of the fanbase by having Aerith still dead for those who are Final Fantasy VII purists, and those like me who want something new where she's actually still somewhat alive. But what I'm most excited for is this sets up for a big reunion. That's obviously the big buzzword throughout all of Final Fantasy VII. But by having Zack and Aerith still around, I wouldn't be surprised if Zack and Aerith show up in the final game and come back somehow at the very end to help the party take down Sephiroth. That right there would be the ultimate reunion, and I think would set up for an even more amazing ending than what was in the original.
Just as worlds unite, so too do they part. But who's to say they can't unite again?
Let's talk about some of the other big story moments and changes in this game. I want to talk about the other story changes that I really enjoyed. And I'll start off by saying that I really enjoyed the integration of the other Final Fantasy VII movies and games. There's obviously the integration of Cicene, who was in Crisis Core. But I also really love the integration of Advent Children. Hearing the vocal choir in Cosmo Canyon and them singing the a cappella version of The Promised Land really brought a tear to my eye.
If you're wondering where the name Seedrop comes from, it's a legendary dragon featured in modern tales.
It's just that they really care, you know? And the developers are fans like us and are pulling from every corner of Final Fantasy VII, including Advent Children. Or even how Sephiroth does the same skewer move in the end battle that is also from Advent Children. Again, I think this is also emphasizing how there are different worlds or timelines and how Sephiroth knows all about them and is trying to supposedly reunite all of them. I thought that was a great change. Another change that I felt was really impactful was the Temple of the Ancients. For those who have played the original, you'll know how frustrating the Temple of the Ancients could be and how that piece of music would just be ingrained into your head because you were just stuck in that maze. The new version in this game is much more smoothed out and enjoyable. It's not as difficult as it was in the original game. But I thought the best change they made in this version was the trials that the party members go through. The scenes where we see Red 13, Barrett, and Tifa and all their tragic backstories was really emotional. But the one that really tugged on my heartstrings was when young Aerith was walking through the streets calling for someone to help her mother. That got me so emotional. I don't know how anyone could go through that without shedding a tear. Seeing this young child crying and calling for help, but no one willing to listen to her, and to see adult Aerith witnessing and reliving this moment was extremely emotional and done beautifully, especially with how this is one of the player's last moments with Aerith. But I do think there were some moments where they didn't exactly nail it. The big one that comes to mind is Red 13's backstory and the reconciliation he has with his father. I don't think they nailed that one because in the original, it's a much more somber scene. In this one, it feels more rambunctious and inspirational, with Bugenhagen trying to rouse Red 13 up. And before you know it, the game's moving on with new stuff, featuring Sephiroth and the Black Materia. I wish we lingered on that moment a little longer, and that it was a little more sad. This is my favorite scene from the original game, and was the one scene that I was most looking forward to seeing in the remix. Unfortunately, I think they dropped the ball on that one, and I think it could have been done better.
That was... Oh, an exciting turn of events indeed.
We'll back you up for 2,000.
No. This one's free.
The last thing I think could have been improved upon is how involved Zack is. With how important he is to the story and how big of an implication his involvement is, I wish there were more scenes with him and places where Zack's backstory was explained more. I know who he is and his story, but for newcomers who haven't played the original, or those who haven't played Crisis Core, I think there's not enough there for people to get an understanding of his background. They could be holding off on that and saving his backstory for the next game, but I really wish Zack was a little more involved with the main story, considering how prominent he is, even just on the front cover. But overall though, this game was truly a remarkable experience. Much like Final Fantasy VII Remake, it's taking everything that fans know and love about the original and twisting it just a little to keep us on our toes. And that's what I think this game's story does so successfully, and what that ending does as well. If I were to compare the two, I think I'd still give the upper hand to Final Fantasy VII Remake. I really enjoyed Rebirth, but I think that Remake just had a slightly more tightly woven story. And I think the initial shock and joy I experienced when I first fully comprehended Remake's ending cannot be topped. But this is still an amazing game that I want as many people to play and check out. Having put in over 100 hours into this game, I can't wait to put in another few hundred more. It's not perfect, but there were so many moments in this game where my mouth was wide open, or where tears were just flowing down my eyes, or where I was left hanging on the edge of my seat. I mean, I forgot to even mention the scene with Tifa and her going through the live stream. That was probably the most shocking change in the entire game. But anyways, this video is already going on for too long. But with that being said, I want to thank you all for watching. Feel free to let me know your thoughts on the game and that ridiculously crazy ending. I know a lot of people have a lot of different opinions, but I really want to hear from you guys. And as always, stay tuned for even more on the best that video games have to offer.